thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
You found your way to the intersection of faith and politics. Welcome to WallBuilders Live. You found us on Thursday, and that's a special day of the week for us because we call it Foundations of Freedom Thursday. It's a day where we dive directly into our founding principles and often have an opportunity to answer your questions, which we're going to do today. We got several from our audience, and if you'd like to send one in for us to be able to address, maybe it's about a founding father or an issue that's happening in the culture, and you want to get both a historical and biblical perspective on that, send that question to radio@wallbuilders.com. radio@wallbuilders.com. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton. David, we got several questions we're going to try to get to today, but this is one of those chances for us to dive a little deeper and see what's on people's minds. At least they're thinking about the principles and how to apply them.
Yeah, and that's always a good thing. And, we talked before, we love these questions because they make us get into things that sometimes we don't think about, as we did on a recent program with get into do the state constitutions also have a method for amendment as they do in the federal constitution. I mean, it was really cool to go back through the state constitutions and see what they had. So a lot of good questions, a lot of good information, and today it's really there's several that have come in on First Amendment kind of issues, and so it's a good subject to review is to go back and see some of those questions on some good perspectives, some good news stories.
All right. Well, our first question is actually dealing with a subject that you've dealt with quite a bit. It's a question of First Amendment constitutional freedoms being protected both in states and from the federal government. Here's the way the person that sent the question is that in Houston, you remember the mayor there, attacking all the pastors, demanding their
the open lesbian mayor, and she went after those particularly 5 pastors. But really, it's kind of weird because there was a bathroom kind of bill that gave special rights to homosexuals, and so there was a petition done to get that bill repealed, and the city folks threw out thousands of signatures and said, nope, you don't have enough, and so they filed a lawsuit to say, yeah, we did have enough. And so then she goes after 5 pastors to intimidate them and say, I want 17 forms of your communication. I want to see your emails. I want to hear your sermons. I want to see what you've done on Facebook. I want to see if you've talked about this issue at all. And so it's a big intimidation thing, but that's the background to this question.
All right, here's what he said. He said the attached article. He sent a deal on the pastor's article. I mean, on the attack of the pastors by the mayor. Indicates that the Houston mayor's attack on preachers is not a First Amendment issue, basically claiming that because it's not a federal attack, because it's a local mayor, that it's not a First Amendment issue. I tend to agree that the argument should be focused on the Texas Constitution rather than the U.S. Constitution, but I was wondering if you agree, or is the First Amendment an issue here? Also curious of your opinion on why this is even in the courts in the first place. Seems that the people of Houston should be calling for an impeachment or a recall. It's from Randy. He said, thanks for all you do. God bless. And, I got to throw this bone to Tim, man. He said in his P.S., Tim apparently was just up in Alaska. He said, we sure enjoyed the meetings with Tim when he was here in Alaska and his presentations, and we look forward to the next opportunity to meet with any of you. So there you go. Tim Barton also very done well up in Canada for us there representing WallBuilders.
Wait a minute.
Randy, appreciate it, man.
Canada? Just because Alaska is north of Washington, you think that's Canada?
Did I say Canada?
You did say Canada, bro.
All right, I'm thinking the God's frozen chosen, I guess. I was stuck on that. So in Alaska, Tim was up there talking about the godly heritage of America, and apparently Randy heard him up there and was very impressed and sent us this question. So, David, where do we go with this?
It's an article on a website called Personal Liberty, which is a conservative news source, and the author here said, look, what happened in Houston is not a First Amendment issue, and under original intent that was true, but under a constitutional perspective that's not true. Original intent, the First Amendment limited only the federal government. It did not have anything to do with states. But once you got into the civil rights amendments following the Civil War, where the states were regularly violating people's individual rights, even what were included as rights in the state constitution. That's where the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment kicked in to say, look, if it's in the state constitution, it applies to every citizen, whether you're black or white, because they were trying to exclude blacks. And that's now part of the U.S. Constitution. So the U.S. Constitution took the Bill of Rights through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and applied those to the states. So the First Amendment is now relevant in the state of Texas with Anise Parker because of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. So under the original 10 amendments, no, that would not have been. But since 1868, yes, it does apply to the states.
So if this had happened in 1800, let's say, or 1810, then these pastors would have needed to use only the Texas Constitution to defend themselves against this mayor. But after the 14th Amendment, it gave them the ability to also use the U.S. Constitution to defend themselves.
That's right. And the reason they don't go to the state constitution is because of the supremacy clause in the U.S. Constitution, Article 6. The U.S. Constitution trumps the state constitution every single time. So you go to the highest authority and just settle it there. If you go to the state authority, you might end up getting appealed under federal stuff. And so why spend the double money to do that? Go all the way to the chief authority at the very outset, and that is the U.S. Constitution. And since 1868, particularly through the 14th Amendment, the First Amendment is now made relevant to the states. So yes, what happened in Houston was a First Amendment issue and has been for more than 150 years, or roughly 150 years. So the author who said it wasn't, under original intent, that would have been true, but that hasn't been the way it is in a century and a half.
All right, bro, we're going to catch a quick break, then we'll come back and get another question. And by the way, folks, just think about this. What if you lived in an extremely liberal state that wanted to take away your freedom of religion or your Second Amendment right? Wouldn't you want to be able to protect those constitutional rights? And that's sort of the position these pastors have been put in Houston. Going to take a very quick break. We'll come back and get another question from our audience. Stay with us. It's WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Federal courts have made several amazing rulings recently, ordering the removal of a cross from a cemetery, banning religious holiday displays, removing the Ten Commandments from public view, prohibiting student prayers whether verbal or silent, and numerous other similar restrictive rulings. As one current justice has noted, the Supreme Court has now become, quote, a national board of theology. Our founding fathers would be astounded. They designed the First Amendment to keep the federal courts completely out of this issue. As Thomas Jefferson forcefully declared, "I consider the federal government as prohibited by the Constitution from meddling with religious exercises." The First Amendment was designed to keep decisions on religious expression out of the federal courts and in the hands of the local communities.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Samuel Adams said, "The liberties of our country and the freedom of our civil constitution are worth defending against all hazards, and it is our duty to defend them against all attacks."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday today, and we're looking at some of those foundational principles and actually answering your questions about those foundational principles. Our next question comes from Adam in Virginia. Says he's a longtime listener and understanding the proper understanding of Jefferson's separation of church and state and his letter to the Danbury Baptist, and understanding the fact that our government has encouraged the spread of the Christian religion through encouraging printing of Bibles, to holding church services at the Capitol, other areas like that. He said, this is a question, is the proper understanding, he said, of the First Amendment that, quote, the government should stay out of religious affairs, or is it something else? It just seems like government has not stayed out of religious activity, but instead has happily promoted the Christian religion. Can you help me further understand this issue? Absolutely, the best regards. So great question, David. I mean, if the view is that they stay completely out of religious activity, then how do they support that religious activity that helps to give you a good culture?
One of the things that you find to interpret the First Amendment, you can find other clauses in the Constitution to help you with that. But to understand those clauses, you have to understand the context of the times. I love the way the Supreme Court dealt with the case in 1892. It said to get original intent, you have to understand the evil which was intended to be remedied. In other words, when you pass a law, what were you trying to stop when you passed that law? We talked on previous programs about what we now call overcriminalization, that we're using laws that were not written for specific things to use them. For example, the Oxley-Sarbanes Act that says you can't shred paper documents to cover your trail. Well, they used that to apply to a fisherman down in Florida that said, well, we think you threw 3 of your fish overboard. That's the same as shredding documents. No, it's not. It's not even the same intent or purpose. So if you want to know the intent of the law, see the evil it was intended to remedy, and the Oxley-Sarbanes Act was part of Enron, the cover-up at Enron. It wasn't for fishing. So that's the same with the First Amendment. And part of the First Amendment is understood by understanding Article 6 in the Constitution, which prohibits a religious test. And a religious test was because at the time the Constitution was written, you had a number of states that had a specifically state-established denomination, not to be confused with religion. They use the word religion, but are you the Episcopal religion? Are you the Presbyterian religion? Are you the Anglican religion? Are you the Congregational religion? Are you the Quaker religion, etc.? And so you, in some states, had test oaths. You had to be from that particular religion. Well, the question became, when they got to the Federal Constitutional Convention, you've got Massachusetts, which Congregational. You've got Virginia, which they are Anglican, and South Carolina's Anglican, and up in New York it's Dutch Reformed, and over in Pennsylvania it's Quaker. What we need to do is say that for federal office, you can't have a federal requirement that you all be Quakers. You can't serve in Congress unless you're a Quaker, or unless you're a Baptist, or a Methodist, or a Presbyterian, or whatever. So all the records, the Constitutional Convention, all the debates on that make it real clear that religion to them was a denomination, and they go through those denominations. So when you jump to the First Amendment, it had nothing to do with religion or the way we define it today as a religious activity. It was Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. In other words, Congress shall make no law establishing Presbyterians or establishing Catholics or establishing whatever it is. And the way you know that also for sure is that on the day that they finished the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, it was the Third Amendment in the original Bill of Rights, but on the day they finished that amendment on religion, on that day, they asked President Washington to declare a national day of thanksgiving. They said, look, we've just finished the Bill of Rights. We need to thank God for what we've just done. And that's a religious activity today. And so particularly led by Roger Sherman and Elias Boudinot, Congress passed a resolution. They sent it to President Washington. He said, great idea, and he issued the first federal Thanksgiving proclamation. I think it was October the 17th, 1789. And he tells why he did that. And in the first paragraph, the first line of the first paragraph, he said he had done it because, he said, quote, it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor. End quote. Now notice that Washington said it's the duty of nations to do these religious things. We have a duty to do this, and that's why we're doing it. We've just finished the First Amendment, and it's real clear we have a religious duty as a government. So they didn't have any trouble at all promoting, I would say, not Christianity so much as biblical faith, what we would call the Judeo-Christian position, because they were just as much promoting the Old Testament as the New in so many areas. That's documented by political science professors who show that of the 5 Bible books quoted most often in the founding era, 4 of the 5 were written by Moses, quite frankly. They were part of the first 5 books of the Bible. So Old Testament, New Testament. So they saw no impediment to promoting a biblical view of things, biblical morality, biblical rights and wrongs, etc. And so the word religion as it appears in the First Amendment is not today defined the way it was 200 years ago. So real simply, yeah, they didn't have any trouble promoting biblical stuff, and they never saw anything in the Constitution as saying you got to be secular and you can't promote religious activities.
Makes perfect sense. We got a quick break. We'll come back and get some more Foundations of Freedom right here on WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, the constitutions of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that is their right and duty, to be at all times armed, and that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. At the time of the American Revolution, numerous other nations also had revolutions, yet 200 years later, America is the only of those nations still under its original form of government. Is this just good luck? Not according to Founding Father Benjamin Rush. He declared, "I do not believe that the Constitution was the offspring of inspiration, but I am as perfectly satisfied that it is as much the work of a divine providence as any of the miracles recorded in the Old and New Testament." George Washington agreed. In fact, he declared, "I should be pained to believe that the United States have forgotten that divine interposition which was so often manifested during our Revolution, or that they fail to consider the omnipotence of that God who is alone able to protect them. Our founders acknowledged that our national success had come from God."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
President Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday. This is where we're informing all of our discretion. David, part of what I love about this, it's a learning time for you and me as well, not just our listeners.
Yeah, it is a good time, and it's always good to go back. As George Mason, Founding Father, said, the only way you keep liberty is by a frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. That's his phrase. And so it's always good to go back and review this and remember this. It's like spring training. Don't matter how great you are as an athlete, you keep going back to the basics over and over again. And that's why it's really good. And we have had several questions come in on the First Amendment, and it's always good to go back and get a good perspective on that.
All right, well, our next question is from Matthew. And by the way, listeners, if you want to send in a question, send it to radio@wallbuilders.com. And we approach all these questions from both a biblical and a historical point of view. So let's get this question from Matthew. He says, "Dear Mr. Barton, I know you usually are answering questions about the founding during Foundations of Freedom Thursday. I've learned much from your teaching, and the listeners are asking great questions. My question doesn't have to do with the founding per se. I know that the Constitution is full of biblical references, and the founders were influenced by the teaching of the Bible. My question is, what Bible did they use? I know that many of the modern versions were not available at the time, but I thought that the founders did not prefer the King James Version because of the dislike of the king. I believe I've heard you say that the Pilgrims used the Geneva Bible. So what Bible did the churches in America use, and if they changed, when and why? Thanks for the information." Man, great question, Matthew. Thanks for sending that in. Again, it's all about biblical and historical perspective, and it is a good Foundations of Freedom question because they got their foundations from the Bible. So, David, what kind of Bibles were they using? I know it wasn't the app on my iPhone.
Yeah, it wasn't the app. I guarantee that.
I can at least rule that one out. Now I'm leaving the rest of this one to you.
The earliest ones that came to America used the Geneva Bible, and Geneva Bible is known for its commentaries that really confronted the culture of the day. And those commentaries are very critical of the king, very critical of what he did in judicial arenas, very critical of what he did in governmental arenas. They were very critical of the king, and the king responded with the King James Version Bible. It is essentially the same content inside, but it eliminated the commentary. So instead of having people criticizing the king and the divine right of kings, it's, hey, we've had kings 1,400 years. Everybody just be quiet. We're okay with that. So 95% of all English translations come out of the Tyndale translation going back in the 1300s, the early English translation by Tyndale. And so whether it's King James, whether it is Geneva, a lot of it comes from there. And so there's a lot of similarities. And again, probably 95% is going to be the same. There are some differences. Genesis 3:7 in Geneva Bible, it makes it really clear that Adam and Eve were Texans because it says very clearly that when they saw they were naked, they went and made breeches for themselves.
Definitely Texans.
Definitely Texans.
Yes.
In the King James, it says that they sewed fig tree leaves together and made aprons for themselves. So there's differences like that, but not much outside of that. It was the commentaries that were really different. As you get into the founding era, the biblical teaching is pretty well established. And by the way, the King James is considered to have the best syntax and language and grammar of any book written in English language, higher than Shakespeare, etc. And that's from academic scholars that are good in English language. So that's what they have said, and that's why it was used for so long. And a lot of churches used it. When we look in 1791, John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration who came out with the first family Bible in America, used the King James Version Bible. But in the introduction to that, he made 2 points really clear. He said, number one, I don't call this the King James because it's not King James's Bible. It's God's Bible. It is His Word. It's not King James's Word. No man's word should be associated with God's Word. And so that's why he did not even allow his name, John Witherspoon, to be put in the introduction that he wrote. He said the second thing is we just fought a battle to get rid of kings. Why would we have a king's name on the Bible? We're not doing that. So the content was still the same, and that was largely the Bible that was used in America. Again, the Geneva Bible, it's not the content so much as the commentaries that shaped civil rights, that shaped education, shaped judiciary, shaped government, that shaped so many other areas of the commentaries. And so the content is pretty much the same, and basically you can say that the King James translation is what they used in American churches mostly, although they did not call it King James. And other thing to note is back then nearly every preacher had mastered Greek. It was able to translate directly from Greek into English. Founding fathers, several of them were fluent in Greek, a number fluent in Hebrew as well. So they could easily take from the original, and often did in sermons and teachings, they came from the original into English, and the King James was fine with them.
I've noticed, David, and I think your teaching on this had a lot to do with that, but the Geneva Bible has become very popular in the last few years as people have wanted to go back and find out what was in the minds of the Founding Fathers. And I have to mention as we go to break, what you did with the Founders Bible is a lot like that Geneva Bible for today, where you take the commentaries of the Founding Fathers and put it in those margins or in those cutouts, to where you can actually find out what was going on in their heads in terms of that particular scripture and how it applied to America. So a really good resource with the Founders Bible. You can find out more about that at WallBuilders.com, and then Geneva Bibles all over the place now, more and more popular. Got to take a quick break. We got time for one more question when we come back. Stay with us here on WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
Hey guys, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And I know you hear my dad and Rick talk a lot about our founding fathers, about the original intent of our nation, the constitutional heritage that we have, and really we've seen how far we've slipped away from that. And I know a lot of us, as we hear my dad and Rick talk, think, I wish there was a place that I could go and I could see these documents, that I could read and learn about the founding fathers firsthand, see the things they did. And I want to give you some websites today that can help you accomplish that very thing. If you get online, you can go to places like Library of Congress, and you can look under their Century of Lawmaking or historical documents. You can go to the Avalon Project, to the Founders Constitution, to Google Books, or even the Internet Archives, or you can just go to WallBuilders' website. We have a section for our library, and under that section we have different subgroups for historical documents, historical writings, even a place where you can get helpful links to find out more information about other websites where you can do research for yourself and find the truth for yourself. Friends, this is a time that we need to know who we are and where we came from. WallBuilders.com is a great place to go.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. We're diving into those principles. And, David, I think we got time for one more good question here from our audience. By the way, folks out there listening, if you want your question to be able to come into WallBuilders Live, just send it to radio@wallbuilders.com. radio@wallbuilders.com. Here we go. David, I realize that we in this country are a declining state. Is there anything that you would refer to people to do to turn things around, to get back to the Bible? Please advise. David, this is a question that is on the minds of millions of Americans that do, they see the decline and they don't want to just sit back and watch it happen. They want to know, how do we turn this thing around?
Well, first thing, and I'm glad I asked about the Bible, because that is the key. And by the way, a longer answer to this is going to be with the book U-Turn. George Barton and I just came out with the book U-Turn, and it talks about this specifically at length. Short answer to this is we as individual citizens have to get back to the Bible. We are now a biblically illiterate Christian people. We are a biblically illiterate nation. John Quincy Adams has a great quote. He said, with regard to the history contained in the Bible, it's not so much praiseworthy to be acquainted with it as it is shameful to be ignorant of it. And we've arrived at the point in America now that if you know the Bible, well, that's praiseworthy because nobody knows it. But back then, if you didn't know the Bible, that was shameful. How could you call yourself educated, not know that book? But Christians do not know that. Only 30% of Christians have even read the Bible, and probably only 5% have actually read it through from cover to cover. So if we don't get back to that, we miss so many of our institutions. And the other quote I would share is one that President Teddy Roosevelt used. He said this: "The teachings of the Bible are so interwoven and entwined with our whole civic and social life that it would be literally," he said, "I do not mean figuratively, I mean literally impossible for us to figure to ourselves what life would be if these teachings were removed." Now, he could point to the economy, he could point to education, he could point to judiciary and government, and all these other things where the Bible built that. We can't do that today. And so what we find is the more biblically illiterate we become, the less well works the economy, the less well works the judiciary, the less well works education, because we just don't understand that these were built on biblical principles. So the key to turning this around is for us individually to get back in the Bible. I challenge everybody, by next Christmas, have read through the Bible from cover to cover over the next 12 months. Make that your goal, and then get the book U-Turn, and you'll find a lot more about this as well.
Man, that's the first time I've heard David Barton throw down the gauntlet. There's the challenge to the audience. That's a great challenge. You got a year. By next Christmas, how many of our listeners will have read through the entire Bible? Help us make that U-turn in America. You've been listening to Foundations of Freedom Thursday. You can get more of them on our website at wallbuilderslive.com. Thank you so much for listening today to Wallbuilders Live.
George Washington. The Constitution approaches nearer to perfection than any other government hitherto instituted among men.
We stand undivided.